Neptune in Sagittarius era, also known as the Me Decade, referring to the dominating influence of baby boomers and their generational Pluto in Leo.
Together we've climbed hills and trees.
The Beatles broke up and the 60s counterculture dispersed into a variety of lifestyles and courses.
Apathy, isn't it? And that we can do something. Okay, so flower power didn't work, so what? We start again.
When Neptune entered Sagittarius in 1970, it broadcast a new spirit through the collective unconscious. Philosophical freewheeling Sagittarius. A more global movement was approaching.
Together we've climbed hills and trees.
Now in the sign of spiritual belief, the surviving communes and cults become normalized into religious communities. The continued influx of exotic spirituality into the West brought gurus and shamans. It was exotic and strange when the Beatles followed their guru to India, but after Neptune entered Sagittarius, religious seeking became cool, as did trekking to the east.
Think of me and I'll be there. We had joy, we had
But the Vietnam War was still raging and may have continued if not for the highly Neptunian act espionage. The leak of the Pentagon Papers by military analyst Daniel Ellsberg showed consecutive US governments lied to the public in order to support a military agenda.
You tried to teach me right from wrong.
The release date shows Media Mercury exactly on the US's natal public descendant, which values Venus opposite an exposing conjunction between Jupiter at the ominous last degree of deathly Scorpio and Neptune only just sliding into Sagittarius, with upsetting Uranus conjunct the USA's authoritative Saturn in the publicly viewed 10th house.
When you see them, I'll be there.
The Nixon government immediately put a gag order on the New York Times, but with uninhibited Sagittarius Neptune, other media outlets immediately picked up the story, leading to the New York Times winning the landmark Supreme Court case on the right to print the story, a big Sagittarian win for freedom of speech.
Goodbye, Michelle, my little one. You gave me
Continuing the Neptunian theme, Ellsberg was acquitted of the charge of espionage through a mistrial. Along with the reactions to various powerful media, this marked the end of the support for the war in Vietnam. With Nixon pushing the ultra-right-wing agenda, a new movement of American conservatism was being birthed.
with the flowers everywhere.
With corporate Saturn conjunct America's radical Uranus and Chiron opposing the American Saturn, the Powell Memorandum is written.
Singing in the sky. Now that the spring is in the air. With the flowers everywhere. I wish that we could both be there. We had joy.
The Powell Memorandum calls for big business to play an activist role in politics, encouraging conservatives to influence media and to fund right-wing think tanks, becoming the blueprint for the new American conservative movement.
Stars we could reach were just starfish on the beach. We had joy, we had fun, we had
Influencing the ultra-conservative Heritage Foundation and ALEC, the right-wing legislation lobby group.
our lives, we had fun, we had seasons in the sun.
June 17, 1972, is Saturn opposite Neptune in Sagittarius. The Watergate scandal erupted, becoming the biggest American political scandal since the Teapot Dome scandal of the 1920s. The long drawn-out affair shows consistent Neptunian deception all the way to the President of the United States, Richard Nixon. After it was discovered that microphones in the Oval Office recorded all of the president's conversations, a bitter legal battle took place, with the eventual release of the tape shocking the nation, not only for the damning evidence against the president, but also his coarse, vindictive, violent, and considered by many unpresidential language.
She was a young American
forcing an impeachable Nixon to resign in disgrace on August 9, 1974, as Saturn exactly conjunct the US's natal Cancer Sun and expansive Jupiter opposed the US's natal Neptune. As the war begins to fade from consciousness, Neptune in expansive Sagittarius moved into a new excess. This was the era of the stadium rock star. Not surprisingly for Neptune in Sagittarius, everything was getting bigger and bigger. With Neptune in Sagittarius, the protest song was over and a new Zeus-like rock star indulgence was becoming. Stadium rock developed as the increased power of amplification and sound systems allowed the use of larger and larger venues. The commercialization and overblown Sagittarian spectacle of stadium rock created a number of musical reactions, including pub rock and punk rock. Boundary pushing and always exploring new territory, Sagittarius Neptune created multiple new musical styles. The exaggerated Sagittarian vibe became a new 70s platform of progressive rock with extended arrangements, concept albums, abstract and conceptual lyrics, and songs that went on and on. With a love of double-necked guitars, Sag-Exag was in full swing. Neptune in Jupiter's sign was expanding everything. The genre of rock now expanded into soft rock, hard rock, heavy metal, art rock, progressive rock, country rock, pop rock, punk rock, post-rock, synth rock, and new wave. Fitting Jupiter's theatrical and flamboyant leanings, glam rock evolved, as did the expansive fascination with space travel.
There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. And there's a starman waiting in the sky. He told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children use it. Let the children use it. Let all the children boogie.
With gregarious and expansive Sagittarius, we saw the return of big bands, literally bands with many members. Many of these being funk bands that came into prominence in the 70s with typical Sagittarian over-the-top enthusiasm, known for flamboyant stage costumes and a post-sexual revolution attitude befitting Jupiter's Greek equivalent of Zeus.
My hip bone connected to my thigh bone. Thigh bone connected to my leg bone. Leg bone connected to my ankle bone. I'm hung up on my bone.
With the confident Pluto and self-oriented Leo baby boomers now making the music, the cynical social critique was out. Baby boomers Neptune in Libra generation's love of love gave a new pop glamour to celebrity couples. Flamboyance of Sagittarius continued with extravagant fashions and the thriving drug culture of disco. With a Sagittarian reputation for promiscuity and multi-drug use, the dance floor was the new center stage, leading to a new emerging DJ culture. dub, literally meaning to copy, involves copying and manipulating versions of other records with reverbs and delays in a pre-DJ style. New hip-hop developed with a Sagittarian style participation, and a fearless macho posturing became a trademark of the new genre.
Push me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. It's like a jungle sometimes, it makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes, it makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
In 1974, radical Uranus was transiting New York City's natal Neptune-Jupiter conjunction in Libra. The symbolic collapse of the famous Mercer Art Center led to an explosion of alternative venues, including CBGB's and The Bottom Line, as a daring new wave and uniquely New York pre-punk sound emerged.
How do you call your lover boy? Try us! Pick it up! Take that light away!
With synthesis being a clearly Sagittarian trait, it's no surprise the phenomenal development of synthesizers in this period, like the suitably Sagittarian named Prophet 5. Although a typical Sagittarian optimism was re-entering the collective, the extravagance of the new rock reached its peak of popularity in the mid-70s when the new punk movement created by the emerging Neptune and Scorpio generation reacted against mainstream rock's musicality and Jupiterian pomposity.
Sometime I might be. I give a wrong time, stop a traffic line. Your future dream is a shopping scheme, 'cause I wanna be an
Although not obvious as symbolic of Neptune in Sagittarius, punk had a philosophical belief in expressing the self beyond the confines of mainstream society. Punk was a cultural revolt predominated by the emerging Neptune Scorpio generation. The anti-hero Neptune and Scorpio punk generation were breaking down the distance between performer and audience. Central to the punk ethic was a DIY spirit with a Jupiterian belief in self-determination.
like a snake calling on a phone. I've got no time to be alone. Love are coming at me all the time. You better think I lose my mind, 'cause I'm stranded on my own. Stranded far from home. Alright.
As Uranus began transiting Scorpio in 1975, the first generation of Neptune in Scorpio was being activated. These included a variety of punk artists including Johnny Rotten, Susie Sue, Dave Van, Nick Jones, Steve Ignorant, Sid Vicious, Lydia Lunch, the list goes on. By the late 70s, the first generation of Neptune and Scorpio with extroverted Pluto and Leo were making hip-hop and punk rock. As the later Neptune and Scorpio generation with a more introverted Pluto and Virgo appeared. Post-punk and the morbidly suitable gothic rock emerged. should also be noted the UK natal Neptune in Scorpio was also affected by this activating transit of Uranus in the late 1970s. Bringing a widespread popularity of punk and the emerging electronic revolution of synthesizers and drum machines to the UK. In particular, setting the stage for a synth dance music explosion.
Here in my car, I feel safest of all. I can lock on my doors. It's the only way to live in cars. Here in my car, I can only receive. I can listen to you. It keeps me stable for days in cars. Do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to make me cry?
With Venus opposite Neptune, Boy George, like the rest of his post-punk Neptune and Scorpio generation, was activated by this transit of radical Uranus to sex sign Scorpio in the late 1970s, bringing gender bending into the spotlight. Also at this time, the young Neptune in Scorpio generation began to create a new dance music, developing from post-punk and the emerging electronic music, clearly defining a strong distinction from the disco dance music of the baby boomer generation. Although unsuccessfully released in the 1960s with low sound quality, the compact cassette was re-released in 1971 while Neptune was conjunct Jupiter. This time with greatly improved sound quality, becoming a more mobile and convenient way to transport music. The ability to inexpensively copy and spread music became essential to the distribution of underground punk rock, hip-hop, and early electronic dance music. For these same reasons, the cassette was particularly popular in developing nations. Even political uses of cassette tapes would be appropriate for Neptune in the sign of belief, the dissemination of sermons by the Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979's Iranian Revolution. The Don't Fence Me In freedom of the cassette was immensely popular, as was the gregarious sharing of mixtapes. Neptune, in benevolent Jupiter's sign, had created a new, free music platform. Popularity increased with the invention of the Walkman in 1979, with a Jupiter trine Neptune. Travel-friendly Sagittarius Neptune now had music on the go.
The music will continue non-stop on MTV Music Television, the newest component of your stereo system.
Also at this time was the Betamax VHS video format war. With Neptune in Sagittarius, bigger is better, hence the larger tape size VHS won over Sony's smaller, shorter tape version.
Are you ready to do the workout?
When Neptune conjunct Jane Fonda's Sagittarian Sun in 1982, her workout video became the biggest selling VHS tape of all time. Although remembered as a sex symbol in the 1960s, activism dominated this era.
Their energy policy will benefit the nuclear industry and the oil companies, and they have given only lip service to the solar industry.
The Club of Rome, a global think tank created in the last degrees of Neptune in Scorpio, predicted complete Earth destruction at the first ever UN conference on the environment in 1972 in Stockholm.
Now, this is the beginning of a debate. Nobody's decided precisely what the limits are. One can question whether it's 2010 where we all collapse or 2050 when we all collapse. But what is absolutely certain is you cannot run a planetary society on the total irresponsible sovereignty of 120 different governments. It simply can't be done.
Known as the Doomsday Report, it predicted the growth-based economy could not continue because of the depletion of natural resources, predicting a complete collapse in society. Awakening to an overwhelming environmental crisis, Neptune in Sagittarius' global perspective brought the concept of spaceship Earth into the environmental world.
It's quite clear that the entire Earth has to be treated as a spaceship, run as a spaceship, planned as a spaceship.
This image, our home, our Earth, one people in one world.
An empathetic and Jupiterian worldview brings the first global consumer boycott against Nestle in 1977 over their unscrupulous marketing of baby formula in the Third World. Blossoming into the largest worldwide citizens' effort of its kind, appropriately for Neptune in Sagittarius, it was initially mobilized by concerned nuns. As Neptune in Sagittarius naturally squares Virgo, many of the theoretical theories of the Neptune-Virgo era were no longer working. The miracle economics of Keynes was in trouble. The illusion of the perfect economic system would play hard into the next era.
Hi. How you been? Oh, grand. Living like a queen.
I'm surprised. Have you been working?
No.
Because if you have, I really have to know. Otherwise, you get into trouble.
No, I ain't been working.
Mrs. Price, you know I'm your friend, but you have to be honest with me.
I ain't been working.
Neptune and Mars, a combination known for violence, especially guns, were in opposition on the 5th of September in 1975 when Manson girl Squeaky Fromm was arrested for the attempted murder of President Ford. Born with Mars conjunct Neptune and Saturn conjunct Jupiter, John Lennon is shot dead on December 8, 1980 during a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction with both the Sun and Moon conjunct Neptune.
You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us. And the world will live as one.
Although marketing experts dive deep into the alternate culture to sell Neptune in Sagittarius' global dream, they also found that previous marketing tactics no longer worked. After extensive research beginning in 1978, they found, not surprisingly, that baby boomers' generation with Pluto and individualistic Leo needed to be marketed as individuals with options of free choice. As a result, new consumer categories were set up, which are still in use today.
Jody is an experiential. This is a group seeking inner growth through direct experience. Experientials aren't in one place much. This is the try-anything-once crowd.
They even claim to have targeted the dark Neptune and Scorpio punk generation.
Rob is an I am me. I am me's are searching for new values, breaking away from traditions and inventing their own standards. Rob even invented his own name, Rob Noxious.
As Neptune was transiting Sagittarius, the continuing sextile to Pluto was now transiting Libra, including the baby boomers' idealistic relationship Neptune in Libra. Resulting in the highest percentage divorce rate ever seen before or since, as the general trend for de facto relationships instead of marriage became more socially acceptable. Freedom-loving Neptune in Sagittarius, ignited by Pluto and Libra's obsessive focus on relationships and equality, brought a vocal and visible gay rights movement, with many countries changing legality.
And the United Nations has declared 1975 to be International Women's Year, and they have chosen this song as their theme.
Second-wave feminism continued to expand and change cultural and legal inequalities, putting Iceland at the forefront in 1975, with Neptune activated in a grand fire trine. 90% of all women went on strike for equal rights. The worldly Sagittarius wanted a global inspiration, giving us the popular gypsy look, folk embroidery and Mexican peasant blouses. Neptune in relationship-oriented Libra baby boomer generation loved their unisex matching outfits. Although fashions were varied, the tight on top with thigh-hugging flared pants continued to be popular, emphasizing the Sagittarian rulership of the thigh. As did the new sexy jeans, becoming a Jupiterian symbol of Western freedom decadence. With notoriously outlandish designs moving into the pirate look towards the end of the era. With an extroverted and high-energy Sagittarian Neptune, physical fitness became fashionable, as did the introduction of the jumpsuit and the tracksuit. Aerobics and jazzercise hit the TV. With a Sagittarian global influence came the increasingly popular TV yoga, introducing yoga to the masses.
Zodiac for horoscopes, daily updates, and answers to your questions.
Why won't she marry me?
If it's written in the stars, it's stored in the computer.
With the Sagittarius exotic influence, Vedic and Chinese astrology began to influence the Western astrological community. As astrology modernized and computerized, Liz Green published her first book merging Jungian symbolism into psychological astrology, focusing on the inner world, the psyche, and spirit.
New reports of Mrs. Reagan's reliance on an astrologer raise new questions
about national security.
Astrologer Joan Quigley told NBC News she and Mrs. Reagan talked constantly, sometimes several times a day. Described by friends as superstitious, almost mystical, Reagan was inclined to defer to his wife's wishes.
No, that's bad luck.
I have learned not to argue with her superstition.
Former aides say Ronald Reagan was a man who read his horoscope and the funnies before the rest of the paper. They say he wasn't only indulging his wife, that the former president also believed in astrology.
Practice of seeking impressions about a distant or unseen situation using ESP became coined remote viewing. With an overblown Sagittarius Neptune, everything was on the table. With Stanford Research Institute studying remote viewing from 1972, they would later go on to form the Delphi Institute and successfully play the silver futures market. The CIA began its famous Men Who Stare at Goats program, experimenting with the potential use of ESP in warfare. This was also the era for the famous sensory deprivation Ganzfeld experiments and the creation of the Mobius Institute, using psychics to assist in murder investigations.
The man is olive-complected, dark brown hair, brown eyes. He has a mustache. He's very clear in my mind's eye right now.
With Neptune in the sign of faith and international travel, alternative religious systems from other cultures gained tremendous popularity. As Neptune slipped into Sagittarius, ex-Beatle George Harrison tops the charts with his ode to Hindu god Krishna, and British rock star Cat Stevens, at the height of his popularity, converts to Islam.
My sweet Lord, I really want to see you, really want to be with you, really want to see you, Lord.
The Pluto and self-oriented Leo baby boomers were drawn to a philosophy of individualism through various spiritual workshops, including an extension of the human potential movement known as EST training, with the popularized doctrine of individual fulfillment is the only concern. In 1976, with Neptune trying Guru Jupiter, came the first experiments into the Maharishi effect, named after the 1960s guru, the same guru that introduced the Beatles to transcendental meditation. These tests claim to successfully prove that if 1% of the population meditated, they would have a positive effect on the entire population. Although something of an Islamic revival in the Middle East, Islam at the time was dominated by the West's casual dress code. Although with Neptune in the sign of belief, its polarity of Sharia law was beginning to gain power towards the end of the era. Jesus was back in style too, with the Jesus movement, often called Jesus freaks. They were alternate culture followers of Christ with no church or external authority, believing in miracles, signs, and prayer. The Christian right also began their expansion into American politics, urging conservative Christians to become politically involved.
Oh, hi, Tammy Faye.
Hi, Tim Baker.
You're hoarse.
I know. I don't know what's wrong with me.
Are you going to be able to sing today?
I think so.
While still in the sign of flourishing fortune, the TV evangelists and the new prosperity evangelists began their emphasis on material gain through God, which would come into favor in the following era. Exotic influence of Reverend Moon bringing his church to the West, the Dalai Lama making the first of many trips to the West, and multiracial Christian cult, the People's Temple, led by Jim Jones, tragically ushered 909 people to suicide in 1978 with Mars and Mercury conjunct Neptune square Saturn and sextile Pluto. Although beginning in the early 1960s, the term liberation theology was coined while Neptune was in Sagittarius, continuing to grow particularly in South America, supporting resistance to often CIA-backed oppressive dictatorships. The religious Jupiter influence also affected Broadway and film, with Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell infusing Christianity with a new Sagittarian exuberance. Although the multiracial cast of Jesus Christ Superstar was deemed progressive at the time, it's quite questionable by today's standards. While the TV show broadcast almost everywhere outside of the US, introduced millions of children in the West to Buddhism.
Oh, don't do that. Don't laugh at the great sage. Remember my staff.
The swaggering and boastings of monkeys are funny. 5 pillars, did you say?
On the finger of the Buddha.
Hello, Carlo.
With Neptune in Sagittarius, the keywords for film were action and adventure. Travolta's iconic pose in Saturday Night Fever being expressive of the archer and magician, and films like Star Wars and Star Trek taking Sagittarius vibe from global conscious to universal. In an era described as New Hollywood because of all the expressive and risk-taking baby boomers that had moved into the industry.
Listen, you fuckers, you screwheads. Here is a man who would not take it anymore, who would not let... Listen, you fuckers, you screwheads. Here is a man who would not take it anymore.
With Neptune in Zeus's sign, sexually explicit films gained mainstream attention. Exorcist takes Supernatural to blockbuster status.
I have a friend in there alone, and I don't want to leave her in there alone. I don't like it. I want to go home.
But I just found it really horrible. I just had to come out. I couldn't take it anymore.
People are extremely depressed by this.
I've never in my life known a movie where people would faint. I mean, it's hard to make people faint.
Can't even describe it. It's horrible.
Foreign films cut a sizable niche of the market and influenced new storytelling techniques with more meaningful and creative options. Hong Kong cinema in particular, and suitable for extroverted Sagittarius, martial art films took their place in the Western film market.
Listen, while you're in California, could you possibly score some coke for me?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I'll just put it in a hollow heel that I have on my boot, you know? How much is this stuff inside?
That's about $2,000 an ounce.
God.
Really? And what is the kick of it, which I never...
Neptune's transit of Sagittarius brought drugs into the Sagittarian party lifestyle, with drug statistics suggesting a higher consumption of drugs per capita than previous or past. Neptune and over-the-top Sagittarius created a new casual context to drug-taking, with cocaine being incredibly popular without the stigma it received in the following era.
Oh, where have you
have been all my life.
We just come in with...
Oh, if you don't mind.
It's not really...
Touted as the champagne of drugs in the US because it was expensive, high status, and said to have no serious consequences. Marijuana had been growing in popularity in the 60s, leading to the 1970 repealing of mandatory sentences in the US. In 1976, with Neptune trine Sagittarius' ruler, Jupiter, California becomes the first of 11 states to make marijuana a misdemeanor. At the same time, the Netherlands decriminalizes it. Even President Carter's administration supported decriminalization. With an over-the-top, high-energy Sagittarian Neptune, party drugs became an integral part of the disco culture. With the chill pill diazepam, also known as Valium, becoming the biggest selling pharmaceutical in the USA for the entire Neptune Sagittarius period. Heroin had been lurking in the black market since its criminalization in 1915. But in 1971, President Nixon called it public enemy number one after Congress's fact-finding mission suggested 15% of US soldiers in Vietnam were addicted to heroin.
Oh, you see, but I'm not that strong.
The widespread use of heroin was exemplified by the phenomenal number of movies about the drug. Many, like Christian F. and Liquid Sky, were all based around the emerging, young and dark Neptune and Scorpio generation that would be later named Gen X. As Neptune crossed the US ascendant of 12 degrees Sagittarius in 1975-76, President Ford had 2 assassination attempts. The Weather Underground bombed the State Building in DC. America finally leaves Vietnam, as well as a shootout between Native American Indian activists and the FBI. Also with auspicious Neptune on the US ascendant begins the Church Commission, a major investigation launched into the illegal actions of the FBI, and in particular Operation COINTELPRO, finding that the FBI consistently broke the law. With Neptune conjunct the US ascendant and Pluto conjunct the CIA's natal Neptune, the Rockefeller Commission makes public for the first time the CIA's use of LSD during Project MKUltra.
This death was the result of CIA negligence and illegality on a scale difficult to contemplate,
as well as exposing a long list of CIA assassination attempts and the utilization of the NSA to illegally spy on US citizens. Sagittarius, known for its luck and love of gambling, Neptune on the US ascendant in 1976, the Republican Party had a fully contested convention, creating a scurry of behind-the-scenes brokered deals, with Gerald Ford eventually edging out new conservative frontrunner Ronald Reagan. With Neptune in the sign of belief, often to the point of zealotry, ideological conflicts continued and expanded, with the newly reformed Provisional IRA born with Neptune at the ominous last degree of Scorpio. As Neptune slipped into Sagittarius, the IRA's previous focus on defense escalated into guerrilla attacks targeting British soil. The hunger strike death of IRA activist Bobby Sands in 1981 sparked massive protests and riots globally as Saturn and Jupiter conjunct the UK's natal Uranus ascendant. With an idealistic Neptune-ruled Pisces sun, Sands became involved in a conflict after the infamous Bloody Sunday of January 30, 1972, when excessive Jupiter and Sagittarius trine god of war Mars in a British military massacre that sparked 2 decades of guerrilla war. His death by hunger strike ignited global resentment of UK colonial history. Previously little-known Palestinian resistance group Black September, founded in 1970 with Saturn opposing Neptune, shocked the world with the Munich Olympics massacre in 1972. Although terrorism and plane hijacking were nothing new, with Neptune in the sign of air travel, hijacking became a serious reality. Kidnapping of publishing heiress Patty Hearst by terrorist organization Symbionese Liberation Army in February 1974, with her apparent Stockholm Syndrome, becoming a gun-wielding member of the group. On the day of the kidnapping, Neptune was conjunct her Mars, opposite Jupiter in Gemini, with Uranus transiting her natal Libra Neptune and Pluto conjunct her moon. President Carter communed her sentence, and she was officially pardoned by President Clinton on his last day of office, January 20, 2001, as Jupiter was transiting her natal MC opposite her natal Mars at the time. With Neptune in Sagittarius, even the famous 70s oil crisis had an ideological origin, as Pluto squared Saturn. Yom Kippur War in 1973 spurred OPEC to raise the price of oil to allies of Israel. Freedom-loving Neptune in Sagittarius global perspective helped activists in South Africa internationally isolate the apartheid regime. As Neptune exactly crossed the Sagittarian ascendant, opposing Venus, of the jailed ANC leader Nelson Mandela, anti-apartheid protesters in New Zealand showed their solidarity to the world by stopping the controversial rugby game with South Africa's Springboks. The highly inflamed controversy that spread to the US effectively banned future sport involvement with the regime, helping bring the plight of black South Africans to Western consciousness. Video arcades became synonymous with the era, with visionary Sagittarius the next frontier was space. In 1971, with Neptune conjunct Jupiter, the first commercial video arcade game was released, followed by the ever-popular Space Invaders. While NASA had funding cut as a result of the impending oil crisis, they continued to send men to the moon, build the first space station, launch the first space shuttle, and sent probes to view outer planets, including for the very first time Neptune. With Neptune in Sagittarius, installation art represented a more dynamic 3D way to express the self. Neptune in Sagittarian art was about transforming the mundane into the magical, with a strong mythical or fantasy content. Neptune in the Zeus-ruled sign took fantasy to the next level, with ever-popular van painting.
My fellow Americans, I'm pleased to tell you today that I've signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever. We begin bombing in 5 minutes.
As Neptune hit the last degree of Sagittarius, new elected conservative Ronald Reagan's controversial joke about the imminent bombing of the USSR is a reminder of the dark cloud of nuclear annihilation that Gen Xers and indeed baby boomers grew up with during the chilling Cold War, which would intensify and crumble during the next era. With Neptune leaving the sign of faith, the religious right in both the Islamic and the Christian worlds had gained political power, all coming to a head in the next great conservative era of Capricorn.